Hello and welcome back to Vox Terra. Last night I was watching the PBS NewsHour.
Tomorrow, President Biden will host a summit at Camp David with the leaders of Japan and South Korea.
That being August 17th, today's the 18th.
But they, along with the United States, share common goals: curbing China's influence in the region.
I was watching an interview with Rahm Emanuel, U.S. ambassador to Japan.
So both on military level, security level, cyber attacks, economic areas have been a target of China's aggression.
But the host didn't question those basic premises, but only seemed to question, well, what if there's a change in administration in the U.S.?
A second Trump administration can just undo them. Isn't that a real concern?
And here Rahm was saying that's why they want to institutionalize this relationship, or in my understanding, contain China.
To ensure that there's a new normal, there's a new standard. It's embedded into, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's embedded into the DNA of all our institutions.
I believe these one-sided media narratives on a heating planet are leading us nowhere good. They're not going to benefit the US of A, and they're not going to benefit whatever nation, fill in the blank, at the time that our public is being convinced to rattle our sabers at. So the Bible says, look at the mote in thine own eye. You know, we really should learn to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and kind of flip things around. And we should question the economic interests that are all at stake of all this. And that's a Noam Chomsky-ish analysis, considering that our media is largely dominated by large corporations and wealthy individuals, and that has to have a built-in bias. Well, if you were a Chinese patriot and you're looking at it from history, even the history that we all know about as Americans but isn't being emphasized to us, let's consider how insidious this Japanese-U.S. alliance could look. Well, in the lead up to World War II, Japan invaded China, and that occupation was noted as being particularly brutal and bloody. Now, interestingly, according to a book called Forgotten Ally, which was sympathetic towards China and points out how China's fought with the West or the Allies in 2 world wars, but yet always seems to be getting demonized or shortchanged, that author, if I recall correctly, pointed out that Japan justified their invasion of China and Korea and much of Asia on that Japan was kicking the West out of Asia. So also taught in our history, but really underemphasized, is that China went through a prolonged period of being carved up by Western commercial interests and occupied by troops to defend and protect those Western commercial interests. And that while plenty of Chinese people fought against that, plenty cooperated as well, as is always the case. Remember, you can always find people to sort of rise up and foment if that's what you're looking for. So the initial attempt in China to kick the West out, or one of the more famous ones, was the Boxer Rebellion. But less famously known is that we, the US of A, sent in troops to help suppress that Boxer Rebellion. And as I pointed out in the past, these attacks on China then wouldn't be justified as we're trying to hold China down. It would be justified as they're not playing fair, they're excluding us, something of that nature. In fact, that's really what started it all when the Emperor of China refused opium imports from Britain, and Britain went and burned down the Chinese Navy. Again, nobody said, hey, they won't buy our drugs, we gotta attack them. They're not playing fair. So you can see how that would really rankle some people that now Japan, who invaded China, was very bloody towards them, then bombed by the US of A with 2 atomic bombs, is now working with the USA, who also, prior in history, sent troops into China to keep them, for lack of a better word, exploited by foreign commercial interests. So we should question, if we truly have a free press, wouldn't there be others sort of putting it that way or framing it like that, how it might look to someone else, instead of these one-sided narratives that lead us to war time and time again. In fact, just listening to recent news events, or even the events over the course of my lifetime without going back to older history, I think anybody could make a case that we are, in quotes, are actually a threat and need to be contained. Over my lifetime, the invasion of Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan, and various coups, like I particularly jumps out of my mind is the coup we supported in Haiti to get rid of Aristide, but as well as more covert, or at least acceptance of the coup in Bolivia, which knocked out Evo Morales, that was under Obama, and I believe that Evo Morales was friendly with China. Then there was the coup that was supported in Ukraine that knocked out a government that was friendly towards Russia. Then there's more recent election interference or interfering in other people's politics, like The Intercept just recently came out with a report about how the Biden administration, and again, this doesn't mean I'm going to vote for Trump or I vote Republican, I don't, but in this regard, both parties are kind of dominated by that same defense industry. How the Biden administration was pressuring the Pakistanis to get rid of Imran Khan because Imran Khan wasn't supporting our stance with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So there's a lot of interference coming from here, a lot of coercion coming from here, only it's just not framed that way, in addition to going around making all these trade deals that are aimed at excluding China. In fact, we've heard a lot of warnings coming from the Biden administration. We've got to cut China off from having access to some of the advanced chips in the AI revolution. And our media just always takes it as a given, this is the right thing to do. But how would this look to someone else? Your country has been invaded, been carved up by foreign powers in the past, including the one right now that is trying to limit you from having advanced technology. So we've got all the killer robots, they don't. And also remember, also underemphasized, we, the US of A, has around over 5,000 plus nuclear warheads, many of which are targeted at China. China has about 350 nuclear warheads. We have something like 800 forward military bases around the globe and are constantly creating new military alliances. Their forward military bases are not so many. And when I talk about economic interests at stake, well, please keep in mind, these wars tend to benefit defense industry always, and that has a major lobbying power within our government and donates millions of dollars annually to American politicians. And those defense industry CEO pays are around $20 million. That's a lot of incentive for conflict. Not to mention, most of the wars, especially in the case of the conflict with Russia, seem to always justify we got to dig up more fossil fuels, we got to promote that industry more. And I don't see how a China targeted by nuclear warheads, having all kinds of military alliances being established against them, and then we're going to jeer at them saying, hey, stop burning coal. I don't see how that's going to work out very well. Which brings me to another point. If you ever notice, whatever you hear in the news about China is always portrayed as something bad. Even when they are doing green energy, it's somehow spun as something bad. Cynical. Yeah, whatever we or a so-called allied country does is, if it's bad, it's just something bad happens. Or if it's good, it's a good thing. Well, let's imagine where this is all headed. If we keep on with this pressure campaign against China, we keep getting our public one-sided information so they go along with it. Well, eventually this is going to come down and cause prejudice against Asian people or people who look Asian. It always does, and I believe it always will. So keep in mind that Rahm Emanuel said, part of defense of what Joe Biden's doing, hey, even if Joe Biden loses, or he didn't say that, but even if there's a Republican in there again, well, it'll be institutionalized, this anti-China alliance. More my words, not his in that case. But now let's imagine we get another President Trump type of person who likes to say China with a derisive tone and talk about Kung Flu, things that then led to the attacks on Asian Americans. And isn't so gentlemanly like Joe Biden is, oh, this isn't about prejudice, we're just defending interests, and whatever that means, interests, by the way, you should question what commercial interests. Well, it's going to get pretty ugly. And that should especially be a notice to all the people who are of Asian ancestry or who look to be, who want to jump on this anti-China bandwagon. I've met plenty of people like that. It's not going to work well for us. And the East Asian countries that are joining along with this, well, again, let's point out Japan's history, how that can look so insidious. But let's just also note, and I think this is interesting to note, if we look at Japanese culture, well, they export a lot of animes as well as video games. Do those video game characters and anime characters look Asian? If we look at South Korean K-dramas, terrific, well done, well-produced movies and dramas, but consider this, many of those actresses, if not almost all of them that are successful in South Korea, have had this eye surgery done to make their eyes look more so-called Occidental or Western. Consider, too, that both China and the USA do not have foreign troops stationed on their soils. And consider, lastly, let's imagine it's what people think of as a victory and China is eventually cracked. The Communist Party is overthrown. Well, what's it going to look like there? What will it look like? It's most likely will look like what has happened to other victories. It will look like victory for Iraq, which is 20 years of hell now. Victory for Libya, 10 years of hell. A major uprising in Syria, also in a state of hell. Most likely it will be a war-torn, beaten down country. that will not be good for its other East Asian neighbors. It will not benefit well for Americans, and there's no way they're going to be transitioning towards a greener, healthier climate in those kinds of conditions. And I do not believe that, and I believe this will play out just like Iraq did, in that yes, you will find some Chinese people to go along with so-called us, although I don't think we should all be thinking in these terms because this doesn't really benefit us. Well, there's a lot who are not going to like it. Well, hey, I hope you found this helpful, interesting food for thought. Maybe give you a little pause on what I consider saber rattling right now. And if so, please make sure you're subscribed, you're commenting, you're liking. Thanks for donating a Patreon to my two patrons, Bella Grissi and Environmental Coffee House. And as always, until next time, peace be with you.